welcome to the March edition of HR Hot Topics. I'm your host, Jodi Schafer, and this month we're going to talk about something that we have never talked about before. It has to do with creative ways to address labor shortages, and I know we've talked about labor shortage data before. In fact, I'm going to link here to the February 2022 episode where I give you all the facts and figures to just make the point that, folks, we have more jobs than we have people to fill them, and that's not going away anytime soon. In fact, the Bureau of Labor Statistics expects that we will add 8.3 million jobs to our U.S. economy between 2021 and 2031. So it's not just sustaining what we have, but adding those jobs. And if you've tried hiring the last few years, you know it's hard enough to fill the jobs we have now. How are we ever going to fill new jobs? There have been a lot of commentary, and I've dedicated some episodes to retention. How do you hang on to the workers that you currently have? We've talked about technology and AI and automating some jobs, right? We've talked about building talent pipelines and how to make your workplace attractive for folks that are considering entering the workforce for the very first time, and how early you have to get your messaging in front of them. But what we've not talked about is the folks that are on the other end of the age spectrum, the older workers. There's a term called unretirement that was not familiar to me until I really started digging into this, so I want to share this with you. Unretirement is a term that describes retired employees who have returned to the workforce or are interested in returning to the workforce. This may shock you. Nearly 66% of recent retirees are considering returning to the workforce. 66%. Why, right? Well, there are a lot of things that drive that. For some, it may be financially focused. Maybe they want to have some supplemental income to offset retirement, or maybe folks want to build a little bigger nest egg before they have to tap into retirement. But for many, it is not financially driven at all. They just simply miss the structure or the social connection that work has provided them. And they feel like they have value and they still have something to offer and they want to feel useful. In fact, when you look at motivators of individuals in the workplace, before the age of 60, compensation is the number one motivator, okay? After the age of 60, the number one motivator becomes meaningful work, the ability to do meaningful work. The boomers have never followed status quo, okay, which is sort of counterintuitive for those of us that are younger than the boomer generation, because we often feel like they are nothing but status quo. But they grew up in the age of the 60s, right? It was all about revolution and remaking the world post-World War II. And there are 80 million plus boomers, so they had enough people in that generation to really affect change. And they haven't stopped. They are redefining what retirement years look like, what it means to be, in your golden period of life. And it's not simply walking away from all of the work that provided value and meaning for the first 30 or 40 years. They want to keep one foot in. Many of them, right? 66% want to keep one foot in. We would be remiss as an employer population if we didn't tap into this demographic. And yet I feel like there's not been a lot of discussion around what they're looking for or how to do that. But I think there's no debate of the value that this group offers. Now, I'll just share with you a couple personal examples here. I have 2 consultants on my team. I had 3 who retired from their professional careers. They were retired for a hot minute and decided, this is for the birds, right? I like my hobbies, I like some free time, but I'm not comfortable just sitting here doing nothing, right? I want to still keep one foot in. And so they came to work for me. And it's amazing because they're not doing it for the money. They're doing it because they just really love the work. And it's so much easier to work alongside somebody who's doing it for that reason, right? I don't feel like I constantly have to try to motivate or compel them to come to work or to take a project. They're all in because they're choosing this. They're not being forced into it. And earlier in your career where you've got bills to pay, right? And you don't have that luxury necessarily of choice, then that reward investment, the time investment and the reward on the other end, that equation looks a little different. So it has been a huge talent pool for me personally to tap into, and it's worked out wonderfully. My mother-in-law, right, spent 50 years working in her career, retired, but she's a go, go, go kind of girl, and now works 2 days a week, for another employer. She gets to pick the days. She loves it. I think they could probably pay her $0 and she would go, because she just likes to be busy, likes to contribute, has a great attitude because she's not feeling forced to be there. It's wonderful. It's absolutely wonderful. And knowing that we have such a big population that sits in this bucket age-wise, and that so many of them are interested in keeping one foot in, it would be silly not to tap into this. So what do these workers want? How do we kind of, keep them connected to the workplace? Well, the first one I already told you about, meaningful work. Okay, opportunities to meaningful work. For some, that means being able to stay connected to their industry, where they've built all of this institutional knowledge, right? So that could be opportunities for mentorship, for folks that are just coming up through the ranks in that same industry. It could be working with a population that they have a strong affinity for. So the job itself doesn't necessarily have to be compelling. There are examples of, frontline workers, dietary aides, janitorial services, customer desk folks that are working in like senior living facilities. And that industry has historically struggled to find and keep talent. And yet you could have individuals whose own parents are now in facilities like that, have a vested interest in making sure that those individuals who are living in those facilities have a wonderful quality of life. And so it's the population that draws them in, not necessarily the job duties. So that might be something that you can plan, but meaningful work is going to be important. Flexibility is another one. These folks retired for a reason. They're not necessarily interested in going back 40 hours, 50 hours a week anymore. So a part-time schedule is probably going to be more appealing, especially if they can choose the days or if the hours can be more or less in a given week based on what else they have going on. And think about time of year too. There are many individuals that are in this unretired kind of older worker category that might leave the state for a period of time during certain months of the year. They travel or they have a second home somewhere or something like this. So could the job be more intensive during some parts of the year and maybe on hold or hiatus other parts of the year, just to allow for them to have that flexibility to sort of come and go? Training is one that sometimes gets overlooked, right? Because these folks are generally seasoned veterans, and so there might be this belief that they wouldn't be interested in training and development opportunities. That is not true. I mean, the reason they want to keep one foot in the workforce is because they feel like they have value to give, but also they want to continue to learn and grow themselves. So creating opportunities for training is going to be big. And then the other one is targeted benefits. So maybe not necessarily health insurance, because this demographic may have Medicare, for example. But boy, a supplemental dental plan or a vision plan or something that had auditory benefits for hearing aids, that might be really attractive to supplement the Medicare Advantage plan for them. Access to retirement planning resources, access to wellness plans, those kinds of perks. Again, maybe more attractive than the actual hourly compensation. These folks aren't necessarily doing it for the money. So if all of this sounds well and good, you've got a group of folks that, are a big group, so they could help with this labor shortage. They have the skills and the industry knowledge and the motivation to want to keep one foot in. How do you appeal to them besides the benefits piece? Well, you have to think about where they're looking. Okay, where would individuals like this even know that you had a job available for them? Is it going to be through AARP's job board, or maybe the American Society for Aging? They have a job board. In fact, I think on Facebook, the boomer generation is one of the highest demographics that use Facebook. So maybe that's a great place to advertise. Your social groups, your churches, all of those kinds of things to get the word out. Make sure your postings don't have age-biased language in them. So if you really are trying to appeal to an older workforce, you don't want to have words like, new grad, that might be an obvious one, digital native, energetic, fast-paced, not that folks in that generation aren't energetic or couldn't work in a fast-paced environment, but it tends to skew younger. So just think about that. Is the language compelling for all if you're truly interested in a multi-generational workforce? Is your imaging multi-generational on your website when you show, even if you use stock images for your website, if you're trying to attract folks in this older demographic, do you have folks that look like them on your website, right? Or the interview committee, same thing. People want to work in a place where they feel like they belong. So having individuals that look like them or have a similar life experience to them or as many years in the workforce as them is going to be helpful. And then finally, think about things like accessibility, right? Is this a job that requires you to be on your feet all day? If so, could you build in additional breaks? Could you sit versus stand? Are the bathrooms accessible? That kind of thing, right? So I think that's enough to kind of get you started. As I said, this is a demographic that hasn't gotten a lot of airplay until recently, but knowing that they are available and they're interested and they have all this skill and knowledge to pass on, and they're not motivated by money, I mean, my gosh, we need to tap into this, okay? But it may require some rethinking and some creative thinking around how you position your jobs. So if you have any questions, you can reach me directly, Jodi Schafer at workwithhrm.com. I'm going to link to some workplace articles. I'm going to link to some demographic information for workplaces so you can see this shift for yourself. But of course, you can reach out to me if you want to talk further. And with that, I will leave you. We'll pick this back up in April.